back to another episode of 10-Sided Dice, WTN Plus. We are talking Dungeons & Dragons. That's what we do here on 10-Sided Dice. I'm Jackson Tollerton. I'm the host and usual Dungeon Master when we're playing and rolling Dungeons & Dragons, dice and all. Today, we are continuing our series discussing the 13 main classes of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Last episode, if you haven't checked it out, you can check it out on our website. You can check it out on our app, WTN Plus. I discussed the first 4 classes, the main main 4 classes, in my opinion, the archetypes of Dungeons & Dragons, which is the fighter, the wizard, the cleric, and the rogue. So today we're going to be diving into the rest of the 13 classes. We are going to be discussing what I call kind of like similar, related, or like offshoot versions of some of those 4 archetypes that we discussed. If you're players of those classes, I don't mean that as a slight, this class is just an offshoot of this other one. I think that the first 4 we discussed are kind of like the home base of fantasy and fiction of what the classes can be in Dungeons & Dragons. Now we're moving on to the specialties that kind of make themselves unique and have their own abilities that are kind of stem from some of the other archetypes we discussed. So without further ado, we're jumping in to what I call the martial offshoots. These are more fighter-based classes. They are, in my opinion, kind of like an offshoot or a different flavor of the fighter that we discussed in the first episode. More of a sometimes less magic, but usually more of a just overall combat focused kind of class. So let's jump in. The first of them is the Barbarian. So look at this guy, he's yoked. Now, a Barbarian is described as a fierce, primal warrior who uses his or her rage to propel them in battle. So this guy, you can see, is pretty, formidable looking, but is a totally different flavor from fighter. You saw the fighter earlier. Lots of heavy armor, lots of weaponry, lots of skill and tactics, manipulating things on the battlefield. This is not the Barbarian's game. They are kind of go back to the heart of it all when it comes down to when a battle starts and any kind of fantasy fiction, anything. See thing, hit thing. That's what the Barbarian specializes in. They can wear some armor. They can't wear as heavy of armor as fighters. It's too restrictive for them because the Barbarian's whole thing is using their own raw power, the raw strength, and their own anger and rage to fuel them for the fight ahead. They don't want to be held back by heavy restrictive weaponry, but mostly armor. They want to have the best weapon they can to cleave the most skulls that they can of their goblin foes or whoever might cross their path. Rage. Rage is the main fuel and one of the main features of Barbarian. It's an ability that lets them do extra damage, take less damage as they're in combat, and really the only drawback for them when using the rage is they're not as able to think logically, use kind of they're kind of on their first instinct while they're raging, not as good as especially if you're multi-class into calculating tactics or using magic spells or focusing on magic spells. No. The Barbarian is here to rage. The Barbarian is here to strike, and that's what they do best. This guy is fitted up with 2 war axes. That's certainly a look. They sometimes don't even need to wear armor at all. They get a bonus if they don't wear armor. They are not supposed to be big walking tanks that can take every hit in the book. They are more focused on crushing what's ahead of them. They are damage doers over being protective of their party. They are, as we talked about earlier, they are qualified as what I'd call a tank. They do draw the attention on the front line, and they certainly can protect others by being this big imposing body in the way, but they're not cowering behind a shield. They are not trying to make their armor class unhittable through the protections of metal, because they're not afraid of being hit. They kind of want to be hit. They want to be in the throes of the bloodbath, and they thrive in it, and that's what they do best. And that's why I call Barbarian a bit of an offshoot from a fighter, in that they serve a very similar function, but this is more raw energy, raw power, damage doing, a wrecking ball just swinging through the battlefield, as compared to a fighter who could serve a variety of functions and tactics. This is a very, very popular class. It's once you learn how and what your rage does and the statistics of it, how much extra damage, how much damage you're taking, they're a pretty simple class to play as well. As I said, their main function is see enemy, hit enemy with big weapon or axe or sword or hammer. That's what the Barbarians do. They rage, they hit. Very fun class, and usually pretty fun to have around the table for role playing as well, because they're not all like cavemen level intelligence. They have a variety of features. Some of them come from just maybe distant tribes, or maybe weren't educated but learned how to fight. It does not mean that they're all just like bumbling, dummies. They are just strong, primal warriors that you don't want to be on the business end of. So that's the Barbarian. We're going to move on to the second of what I call the martial archetypes. This is the Paladin. Now, a Paladin is, I would say, a little bit closer to being an exact fighter than the Barbarian, but Paladin is kind of a perfect hybrid between two of the first four we talked about, which is fighter and cleric. Bringing back the cleric. Paladins are divine champions who bolster their efforts with deity-granted magic, gaining special boons from their god through devotion. Now, if you watched our first episode, you'll probably think that that's a somewhat similar description to a cleric. Clerics and paladins definitely have lots of overlap. The main difference, I would say, is that the paladin is most definitely focused on melee combat. They are in an order of scholars and clerics and priests and knights. They are the frontline knights of their religious order. They are champions of the light. They are champions of their god, and they are this very, very like Templar, kind of themed, holy warrior, holy crusader, that sort of thing. They are fighters at the essence of it. They are going up into the combat. They're going up on the front lines. They wear heavy armor. They have big swords and maybe axes or spears that they carry, and they are invoking their gods to guide them through the battle. Where they stray from cleric is that cleric has a lot of different spells that they can has access to: healing, curing wounds, curing diseases. While paladins have a little bit of that as well. They're all kind of related, especially like a cleric of God A and a paladin of God A would certainly have similar abilities as far as that goes, because each of the gods kind of dictates what abilities and domains that they fall under. Where paladin strays from cleric is that their magic is usually channeled into doing more damage to their blasphemous enemies, their heretic enemies who do not follow in the ways or do not respect the ways of their religious order. One of the main features of paladin is called smite, divine smite. Sometimes earlier editions refer to it as smite evil. But a paladin, while usually good or usually lawful neutral, somewhere in that alignment, like cleric, there can be evil paladins in 5th edition, because a paladin at its core is devoted to its deity, its god that it serves. And so there are unholy knights, dark knights, that what I would qualify as a paladin, that serve their dark masters. But usually a paladin is a stalwart champion of justice, that is a little bit more stoic and a little bit more stern on their beliefs at times than clerics. Clerics, I think, are often trying to spread the word of their faith, and would like to have a conversation with you. They would love to have you join them if you are willing. Whereas paladins are often, as I kind of said, in a Templar standpoint, usually go out and seek evil and or what they perceive as evil, blasphemy, heretics, and try to either bring them to justice or full on use their holy might to smite them right where they stand. And the divine smite ability I mentioned earlier essentially functions as they can harness their magic from their god and do extra holy radiant damage with their swords or their spears or whatever weapon that they might use, while usually, as I said, staying on the front lines and protecting their clerics, who are kind of keeping the holy war battle on the up and up. So that is Paladin. Paladin is a super strong class in 5th edition and in Baldur's Gate and stuff like that, because they get the martial prowess of the fighter and like Barbarian and whatnot, with a bit of mix of holy boosting that kind of is inspired from the cleric archetype. Very strong, sometimes a little tougher to play, role play wise, because when you're playing such a devout character, you're going to run into other party members and other characters in the world who don't have your same piety or your same dogma about your religion, and sometimes could lead to conflicts on their own. But they certainly do well in good aligned parties, and they can be an absolute asset across the board. Combat, a little bit of healing, a little bit of protection, and lots of holy light to guide the way. So that is the Paladin. That's going to bring us to a break, and we will be right back. Stick around. Hey, welcome back to 10-Sided Dice. We are rolling along with our class rundown, our 13 classes of Dungeons & Dragons. We've made it through the first 4 archetypes in our previous episode. We've made it through Barbarian and Paladin in our martial character class episode here today. We're moving on to our third offshoot, our third martial archetype, which is the Ranger. Now, a ranger is a term that has popped up a lot in fantasy and fiction before. I would say arguably most famously, Lord of the Rings. There are multiple rangers in Lord of the Rings. You may be familiar with Mr. Aragorn, who's often mentioned as being a ranger. And there's also a popular book series called The Ranger's Apprentice, if you're into kind of young adult fiction fantasy stuff. Rangers, there's certainly differences in whatever book you may be reading. Rangers are also referenced, I believe, in Game of Thrones. Generally, a ranger is a woodsman, survivalist, and tracker that possesses skilled martial abilities, as well as which helps make them deadly hunters, as they often are outside connecting to nature. So this depiction we have here shows, I would say, a just classic ranger. Robin Hood maybe might come to mind for some people. Ranger, range, archery, bows. they are usually at the heart of the ranger, which I'm sure makes sense, but is not always the case. Rangers have possess a variety of skills. They're like your Aragorns and your Legolases are very, very ranger coded. They can use bladed weapons like short swords and long swords, but they excel from a range. They are master woodsmen. They can hunt with the best of them, and they are masters of the bow. Long bows, short bows, crossbows, firing bolts or firing arrows from afar, and plucking your enemies down before they can even get close to you, for you to have to worry about them up in melee range. Ranger is a very fun class. It's also connected to nature. You can see that there's like a wolf behind the ranger. Certain editions of D&D and other fiction fantasy stuff also often shows rangers joined by animal companions. This kind of connects to their time in the woods and being able to connect with nature, and sometimes even communicate, some usually non-verbally, with some kind of body language and animal handling skills. The ranger fills out a very interesting kind of niche in the partyscape, in the world, and in their service to their group. They can track, they're survivalists, they can kind of spend a lot of time out in kind of harsher terrains than most people can. They're hunters, they can get secure food for their group, and as I said, combat-wise, they are absolutely deadly from afar. Yes, fire bolts and lightning zaps and all from the magic users are good. Sometimes there are abilities that will impact a wizard's ability to cast magic. Then they are kind of like a sitting duck. The ranger is always good from afar, magic or otherwise. They can fire their arrows, they can fire their bows, and make sure that you're keeping up the pressure from the distance. But rangers also do have magic. They have access to magic. They're in touch with nature and the gods of nature and the spirits, and they can access a variety of kind of like nature abilities. They can raise plants up from the ground to kind of like wrap around and entangle their foes in like vines. They can use magic to kind of like put like little markers, a little magic marker, not like the pen, but like an emblem over someone's head, and kind of like keep track of them from afar, help hunt them down if they start to run away. They can, as I said, commune sometimes with animals and even befriend them. Something that's nice about a ranger is that when you're adding them to the party, you're not just getting a bowman, you're getting a bowman and his wolf, and some that they add a lot. And I think they're one of the most like flavor fun classes. You can do a lot of different things with them. They kind of have I'm saving the term jack of all trades for the last class of the 13 on the list, because they are the true jack of all trades. But ranger is quite up there. They have access, they can use armor, they can use weaponry, they can use bows, they have magic, they can communicate with nature and animals, and that really fills out a lot of stuff in a party. So that is the ranger. We are going to take one more break, and we will be right back. Hey, thanks for sticking around. So we have gone through Barbarian, we've gone through Paladin, we've gone through Ranger. These are, as I said, our martial archetypes. These are our martial classes that are all about being in some combat. while straying a little bit from some of the other ones that we've experienced before. Barbarian and Paladin, Rage and Holy, they're kind of like offshoots of Fighter that have their own specialties. We've discussed the Ranger, which is kind of a interesting cross between maybe a fighter and like a rogue. They can kind of jump around between battles. They can use ranged weapons, melee weapons, nature magic, maybe a little bit of cleric in there. And they're also a very fun class. Moving to what I'm going to call our last of our martial archetypes. The other classes we're going to get to are offshoots and variations of wizards, clerics, and we have one variation of rogue. So this is our last one of the martial ones. This is the monk. So monk was one of the I would say last of the old regime of classes. Like monk kind of came around like 2nd edition, early 3rd edition, really started to get its stride. Monk's been around for a while now. There are a couple classes on our next episode that we'll dive into that are really newer for like 5th edition, that are really considered new classes. Monk is like the oldest new class in a way. So as I said, it's been around since like 2nd, 3rd edition. Monk has two kind of connotations when you think of monk. I think the first one you think of like a monastery, sometimes like a religious order of people that like live in the mountains, maybe are like devoted to like a certain religion or like a certain dogma, and tend to like their temples. That is a big part of the monk class in Dungeons and Dragons. Usually your monks kind of are part of an order that they follow like that. They have a certain doctrine maybe that they adhere to or live their life by. Or maybe there's a certain area, a forest, a bog, a mountain, where their temple is, that they not only keep the peace there, but they keep the peace in the surrounding areas. And it's very, helpful to have spiritual guidance from such monks, but sometimes in a world of wizardry and swords and combat like that, push comes to shove, and sometimes those monks need to stand up for themselves, and especially when they're protecting their surrounding temple or community, and that is where our D&D martial archetype monk comes in. These are kind of like warrior priests, if you will, warrior monks, that are kind of the protectors, the guardians of their temples, that often go out into the world, if not to find themselves on their own journey of self-discovery, but they'll also kind of go out at times to kind of spread the word of their order, and make sure that maybe sometimes the peace is being kept in the greater world. Monks are trained martial artists who pull from their own strength and fortitude of their bodies to defeat opponents using hand-to-hand combat and channeled ki energy. Maybe you've heard of ki or chi. Sometimes that kind of gets thrown into the mythos of certain magics or certain martial artists. Ki is like a big thing I know in like the Dragon Ball Z world, and that's kind of a similar kind of vibe. If you're familiar with that kind of world, that's kind of where monk really thrives. They are throwing them hands. They are throwing fists. They are throwing flying dragon kicks, the Bruce Lees of the world. Of Omi from like Shaolin Showdown, that sort of show. These are martial artists who have trained their bodies to the peak. They are physically fit. They are healthy. They are able to kind of channel their own body and their own strength and their own kind of like inner energy to keep themselves at their peak physical condition, and also can use their body as a weapon. That's sometimes like over exaggerated as somebody trying to be tough. These guys are literally human weapons. They can rain down a flurry of blows on their foes. Punch, 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 kick. Punch, 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 punch. Karate chop, knee. They are not using swords and they are not using axes like their fighter and barbarian companions. Nor are they firing fireballs and healing wounds like the clerics. They are going and using their own fists and feet and elbows. They are the weapon. They don't need anything else. Sometimes you might throw in like a nunchuck or like a quarter staff to kind of those are called like monk weapons. They can use those, but at the heart of it, they are fisticuffs, martial artists. They can use their chi, their ki, excuse me, to channel things within them. They can give themselves a spurt of extra speed. They can sense when like disease or poison is starting to set in their body and their blood. And they can try and cure it. Literally just think and manifest it within their own body, channeling their own inner power to rid themselves of such ailments. While also, as I said, being a fast-moving force on the battlefield that can rain down a string of attacks. Most classes, most characters get an attack, one or two maybe, until you get higher and higher level, then the attacks go up. But Monk is like the poster child, if you will, of extra attacks because they are fast, they are agile, and they are dexterous. So Monk is kind of an interesting. It's an interesting kind of field that they fall into with the other classes. They are focused on being up in melee combat, being up in the thick of things like everyone else, or like the other martial combatants, I should say, but they don't wear heavy armor. Sometimes that puts them in danger, but their own dexterity and their own like will usually gives them extra bonuses to their armor class. They don't need to be wanting around in heavy armor. It just holds them back. Any fans of like Naruto, Dragon Ball Z. This is like right up in that alley. Rock Lee dropping like the ankle weights. These guys will do similar things. They are punching and kicking, and they are the weapon. Your Goku, your Vegeta, your Gohans. These are like monks for sure. Like that is their way of fighting. And roleplay wise, they're usually an interesting add to the party because they usually are kind of like fish out of water kind of characters. They're coming to the world, coming to the adventure or the party from their own monastery or from their solo travels on the road, and have their own kind of way of seeing the world that usually makes for some interesting and funny encounters with anybody that has never met a monk. So that is going to bring us to the end of our second episode of the series, discussing the 13 classes of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We've gone through today Barbarian, Paladin, Ranger, and Monk. These are our offshoots of Fighter. We have 5 more classes to discuss. We have a couple of subsections of what I call subsections of Wizard. We have 2 that I call a subsection of Cleric, and we are waiting. I mentioned the Jack of all trades, the very, very special end to our series that I consider a branch off from Rogue. So we've gone through 8. We've gone through Fighter, Wizard, Cleric, Rogue, Barbarian, Paladin, Ranger, Monk. You can start to see all the different classes that you can play in this game. It's just one of the best games ever because of how many customizations and changes you can throw in to make the character you want to play. So that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode. Stick around. We'll have a third episode in the works. We'll discuss the 5 remaining classes of Dungeons & Dragons, and after that, maybe we'll stick around and get back to some dice rolling. And if you want to check out any of our previous episodes, both of our table plays, playing through some campaigns with some friends, and as well as the previous episode in this series, you can check it out online on news10.com. And you can check it out on our app WTN Plus. I'm Jackson Tollerton. Thanks for joining me on 10-Sided Dice, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.